Up next, we have generational dynamics at work, navigating your career across decades. Let's have a listen. Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime Series with me, Kevin Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me in today's leadership and coaching segment, she's a dynamic leadership consultant and the co-author of the Facilitation Advantage, a practical guide for leaders seeking to enhance their confidence, communication, and influence. Please welcome to the show, Therese Miclot. Am I saying it right, Therese?
You are. You've got the French. Yes, it's like Merlot. So I'm thrilled to be here, Kevin.
Thank you. And thank you for making some time just to chat with us. So, Therese, we connected online and, you sent me some information about what you do and a really interesting conversation that we have. But before we jump into that, don't you just want to give us a little bit of background about who you are? I mean, besides the introduction and what it is you do?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think the short story is that my job is to help leaders really increase their impact. And that can happen in many ways, when they're in high stakes moments, when they have to now lead teams, when they have to lead through complexity and change. And I used to be in HR strategy roles where I would sit in the back of a room and I would listen to the senior executives talk about the next generation of leaders. And my job was to figure out, okay, how do we get leaders ready and accelerated to be able to move in that direction of the new strategy? And so that's where my life's work has been.
Fantastic. Yeah. And that's why today's conversation is going to be a one of knowledge and insight, because coming from that background and that conversation around being the generational dynamics of work and navigating your career across decades. When I first saw that topic, I was like, it's interesting. I read somewhere, or I probably heard it on a podcast, that in certain workforces, in certain organizations and business, we have approximately 5 generations that are engaged at any given time or in the same team, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just for that simple context, it's such an important conversation to be able to have and to speak about, right?
I think so. I'm wondering if your experience is like mine. When I talk to a lot of leaders, it's probably the first thing they mention that's a pain point. Like, I have to lead these people that are coming into their first jobs and they're so different, where they'll make these kind of generalizations, like they don't have the work ethic like I used to, or they're not motivated to advance their careers. And so I just hear that as a constant drumbeat. And likewise, I hear from earlier career leaders who are like, I'm struggling with older leaders or leaders of a different generation that are resistant to change. And so there's this kind of natural occurring tension that I'm experiencing. Are you?
Absolutely. And I think because there is such a dynamic team in business today, you have to consider that we are very different and the generations are very different.
Yeah.
How we view leadership, how we view people, and sort of how we're exposed to information has changed so dramatically just in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So how we consume information is also influential on how we behave and the impact that we choose to have in the world. Certain things a 50, 60, 70-year-old person kind of views as important is just not as important to a 20-year-old, and vice versa. So that dynamic in play, I think, has a massive impact on productivity and how teams engage and perform at the end of the day.
Oh, completely. Even like a small example of that is I was talking to a more senior leader in their 50s, and they were saying, trying to solve this problem with my team. And I was telling my direct report, who's in their mid-20s, go call so-and-so. And they were like, I'll just send him a text and I'll just send him a Slack. And it was mind-boggling to this leader, like, just pick up the phone. It's going to be so much easier. But it wasn't reflective necessarily of other generations who consume information, who want to communicate differently. And I think those tension points are, like you said, I think they're the cause of teams not being as high performing, and they're getting in the way of us all being able to get what we want done.
Yeah, it's such an interesting dynamic. But I mean, one of the questions that I had, just sort of thinking through what today's conversation could really unpack is pervasive stereotypes and misconceptions. And I think the obvious ages comes into mind.
Yeah.
What are some of the other kind of stereotypes, or pervasive stereotypes at least, and misconceptions that we see within generations in the workplace that you are experiencing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of limiting beliefs about other generations. You've touched on some. Others are that, I'll hear that people from earlier or younger generations, they don't want to work hard, or they just want to fast track. They feel entitled to be able to reach a senior level role, and they didn't, pay their dues, so to speak. And so I hear, older generations, Gen X and Boomers, who are like, it took me 20 years to be able to get to a senior role. And these young people think that there should be a direct elevator to the top. And then again, I think that vice versa, that younger generations think that maybe more seniors, or they have limiting beliefs about how agile they are, or in the age of AI, it's hard to get them to use the latest version of any software platform, and so that they're going to get in the way of my success, that they're kind of past their peak, and so they have old knowledge that isn't going to help me succeed. So it's pervasive how we have these stories in our head about other people, even of our own generation, but of any generation.
And as you were like unpacking that, like I'm thinking about the younger generations, and people do think they have that impression that why do we have to conform to what authority is? And they have this agenda. Well, it seems to have this agenda to have to convince them almost that, this is how. But because I'm curious by nature, and because I'm curious about humans, one of the things that I've stepped back about looking into younger generations is to say, perhaps there is some truth to what it is they're pushing for people to be more accountable for how they behave and the values that they say they have, and, the systems and beliefs that we're supposed to have about leadership. And here there's generations coming and going, yeah, but you keep saying we're this, but you don't behave it. So even their accountability agenda, as I would put it, kind of really highlighting and bringing to the forefront is not that bad if you really take a step out of it and kind of look, what is that insight that they are bringing, if it were an insight?
Yeah, they're bringing a lot that I think is shaping the future of work in many positive ways. One, I was talking to a senior leader who, was frustrated with this younger leader who, isn't going to work 60, 70 hours a week. And I said, well, what if, you framed it differently and recognized that younger generations are much better at holding some boundaries? Like that's not inherently a bad thing, that our younger generations are looking at the need to change careers, change companies, change skills at a much more rapid pace. And so they're going to be about, what do I need to do to help prepare me, and not just, give to the organization or the company. That's not inherently a bad way of thinking about holding boundaries to allow for you to have the life that you want and not work 80 hours a week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such an important perspective that we absolutely need in organizations today. Another question is, how can leaders leverage facilitation skills, for example, to bridge generational gaps and foster environments where diverse age groups feel heard, valued, and motivated?
Yeah. And I'm guessing a lot of people are like, like how facilitation skills, where does that come in? And so I co-wrote this book called The Facilitation Advantage. And the premise of it is that all leaders in any generation need a set of skills that go beyond just their domain expertise. And I think that they are more important than ever as you are working with teams across, like you said, 4 or 5 generations. There's a couple skills in particular that I think serve you well. One is mindset. So again, back to, we tell ourselves stories all the time about what we're noticing in others, about ourselves, and we draw conclusions very quickly. And that's the first thing I think we have to do is, if we recognize the story we're telling ourselves, they'll never change. They don't have a work ethic. They just are out for themselves, or they can't learn new things. Whatever we're saying about the other generation, we've got to stay more curious about it, as opposed to thinking it's a conclusion. Because here's the reality: your thoughts drive your emotions. So if you're thinking they're just lazy, they don't want to work, put in the effort, you're probably frustrated. And then when you meet with that person, you're probably showing your frustration, right? Like, I see you came in, a little late today again, or, oh, it must be nice to, have the whole weekend off, or whatever, which is little microaggressions. And then guess what? People are just going to react to your behaviors. And then when you see them, react, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You walk away from that call or a conversation like, see, they have no work ethic. So it's a important place to start, is to stop the thinking or pause and ask yourself, is what I'm saying about the other person accurate? Do I have evidence of that? And could other things be true?
High-performing teams don't just happen, they're built. And at the core of every successful team is a contagious identity. It's more than teamwork, it's a mindset. It's about creating a culture where collaboration is second nature, innovation thrives, and every member steps into their true potential. When teams embrace the correct mindset and contagious identity, they tap into something bigger, a shared purpose, aligned values, and an unstoppable moment that drives high-performing teams. Because when identity is contagious, every team member plays with passion and owns their impact, and thrives in an environment where growth isn't just expected, it's inevitable. A contagious identity is where power meets transformation. For more information, go to kevinbritz.com. Yeah, I laugh because it's one of the workshops that I currently run is specifically aimed at mindset. And one of the things we cover is the Arbiter Institute of Leadership's approach to, and they call it collusion.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly this. My perceived idea of how someone behaves, I then perceive it. And then because of their behavior, I respond in a certain way. And it's a me-focused approach. And you kind of go, okay, but if you just stop for a second and put yourself on hold and kind of like, what about that person? Like, what are they going through? What are their life, their goals, their achievements? What are they really trying to achieve, in this moment? And suddenly when you have just a shift of perceived idea of that engagement,
Mm-hmm.
it completely changes how you engage with another human being. And they refer to the inward outward mindset of things. So I love that you mentioned mindset, because it's so significant and so important, specifically for generational dynamics, but also for any kind of team dynamic.
Oh, so true. And I love what you said, and I completely agree. And what I take away from what you offered is it's to stay curious.
Yeah.
Like to instead of just letting those stories just invade your brain without checking them, is to say, I wonder what else could be true, or how do I know that to be a fact, or what else might be happening that I don't know about. And I think if listeners could just take that, like, just don't believe everything you think, and that it is something that you can manage, as opposed to it just be waves of thoughts that are uncontrollable. You're already going to be able to navigate generational differences, or just any kinds of differences.
And I think, in my personal opinion, and many people think this, but I always see the number one skill that any leader of any team or business out there has is curiosity. The moment you lean into the curiosity, whether you understand it or not, you don't understand, you don't understand the results, you don't understand how the strategy or whatever is showing up for you goes about doing it. Like, curiosity in itself offers you a complete different frame of kind of going, okay, so what else, as you say, what else could be true for this situation?
Yeah. Curiosity is the fuel for growth.
Yeah,
it just is. And I think along those lines, the other skill from the book that I think is supremely helpful is the skill of listening. That goes very hand in hand with curiosity, because I think we all can think of moments when we're in a meeting or in a conversation, and we can tell someone's like not genuinely interested in hearing our perspective, but they might be faking it, like even at most meetings, right? Always end, any questions? Any questions? Most of us know, like, okay, I don't know if you really want my question. Or we're thinking, please, please, please don't anybody ask any question because I just want to get out of this meeting, right? But I think if your curiosity can show itself in your questions. So instead of like, are there any questions? You could ask, what about what we talked about do you really like? Or what do you think would be really hard that we may not have talked about yet in order to make this happen? That's curiosity in action, and just in the frame of a question. And I think at the end of the day, what is just human across all generations is our desire to be heard. And it doesn't have to mean that you're going to get the answer you want or the direction or change someone's mind. But I just think it's just a human condition of ours that when people feel heard and understood, they're more likely to want to hear and understand you.
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the key positions to hold when dealing with different generations and the dynamics of what that offers is the commonality right there is seen and heard.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we have to kind of work through layers in order for people to be willing to tell us their truth. So I'll give you an example of a company I was recently working with, and they were launching a very different software platform, and their sales organization, their sales leaders in the field were relatively older. And there was a lot of pushback on that. Like, some of the sales people who are very successful would be giving a lot of reasons of like why this isn't going to work and so on. And long story short, what was underlying their resistance wasn't the technical nature of the software platform. It was something very vulnerable. And the vulnerable issue was that some of those senior salespeople didn't feel comfortable using technology. They relied on relationships. They knew their territory. They had, long-standing 20-year relationships. They could call up people, right? And they weren't going to expose that or say that to the senior person who happened to be much younger. That could have been, the son of these salespeople. So he was ramming it through, like, nope, we're going to work through these problems. But it really came down to good listening and listening under the surface. Because there was a generational issue there that, he was just trying to fix the surface. All right, well, we'll change this function or we'll roll this out this way. And it was overlooking what was at the root of the conflict.
Yeah, when we look at the root of conflict in itself, then you kind of go, okay, so when you do have such unhealthy dynamics or potentially unhealthy dynamics, there might be an actual root cause, and are we even talking about it? And sometimes we're trying to fix these superfluous kind of dynamics above the surface, and you kind of going, no, that's not the problem. There's a deeper conversation to be had here. But what I often find, and I'm sure you might also agree, is very often with age, people don't like unpacking limiting beliefs or limitations for that matter. Well, if you think of it, like nobody does, generation does. But essentially, when you have, and a point to the facilitation advantage, when you can facilitate people through navigating how to have difficult conversations like that, it really helps with how that dynamic could change. One of the things, for example, I always hear from some people is, well, I've always been like this. Like, why should I change? Like, this is who I am. If you don't like it, suck it. Yeah. But if you just stop right there and you kind of think about the importance of what could come from this conversation, maybe instead of just throwing your hands in the air and not dealing with the deeper leveled kind of restriction, to rather you go, okay, so can I be courageous enough to deal with something that makes me really uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And again, through facilitation, that's really possible.
Yeah. We call that balancing risk and safety. So it's one of the chapters in the book, and you just kind of perfectly described it, that we are often, particularly as leaders, needing to surf the polarity of creating safety for people, right? Like, it's okay to screw up. It's okay if you don't get it the first round. It's okay. We want people to feel psychologically safe. And at the same time, as leaders, our job isn't just to create comfort, right? And to make everybody just feel like they're, at a sauna or a spa when they come to work, although that would be lovely. It's also to be able to help people feel comfortable being uncomfortable, like, because we're all going to have to sit at that edge more and more, just given the pace of change and everything that's happening. And so that's part of our job. Is it's kind of like if you ever hire a personal trainer, like you wouldn't feel like you got your money's worth if all they did was make you feel comfortable, right? Now, you don't want to sprain an ankle or twist your back. That's too much. But you would feel good coming out of that saying, all right, like I'm stretched, right? And so for most of us, we have to be able to know, how do we do that without harming people, but also without creating a space where people don't feel inclined to, stretch or grow.
Yeah. As you're speaking through that, one of the questions that kind of lands for me is, considering the world and the dynamics of leadership in the world currently, and we're currently seeing it, in like front page everywhere. How important do you believe, because you work in a leadership capacity and you come from that space, how important is it that we actually take responsibility for what we say and what we do, and really lead with that example? Like, just emphasize as the facilitation advantage. And I see that you have a wonderful self-assessment, which we'll talk about, but like, how important is it for leaders to absolutely show up with a wonderful authenticity and integrity of how they what they do?
I think that's also universal, right? Don't we, news aside and world events aside, I think that we crave leaders who are authentic. And that I think it will be your competitive advantage as a leader that will help future-proof you in some ways. And here's why. Because I think that you want to attract the very best talent, right? And if you've invested in a lot of direct reports and they walk out the door, there's a cost. There's a hard cost to losing good people. Yeah. And as people have, more choice and more options, it'll be increasingly important for you to create an environment where you attract good talent. And I think for most of us, we're attracted to leaders who, are willing to tell us the truth, who are willing to be vulnerable, who are willing to show their flaws and be okay with ours, who push us, who have a high demand for excellence, who are clear but kind with giving feedback. And, I know that's counter to everything we kind of see in, maybe government these days, but I think that it still holds true.
Yeah, and I love the way that you framed it as future proofing, because when you really look at some really great success stories and successful companies out there, you realize that not everyone and all the time, but a large part of the leaders that do show up responsible and authentic in a way, even when they get it wrong, people will follow. People will, they want to follow people who show up that way. And I think, as you say, it's all the news and politics aside, it's an inherent quality that I think is an important journey that we need to go on. Such an important factor of what the future of work needs.
I think I 100% agree. I really do think it's your competitive advantage, and it's not screaming and it's not loud, but it's very much tangible. And I know a lot of people, maybe you have too, Kevin, who have left companies to go work for a leader because they're like, I want to work for that leader because I know I'm going to get the straight truth. I know I'm going to get developed. I know that they're not going to sugarcoat things. I know I'm going to always know where I stand. And yeah, I certainly hope, and I really do believe that these will be your competitive advantage skills.
So, Therese, I love this conversation. It's as you can hear, it's it's where I thrive. But I mean, if in what ways, if we could leave the audience with some information today on in what ways can organizations proactively create cultures that not only embrace generational diversity, but also turn it into a competitive advantage for collaboration, innovation. I'll just give you a quick story on one of the clients. It's an international client that's one of the divisions that really are leaning into creating a certain type of culture. One of the things that they're looking at for the team itself is to create a brand in the team. And kind of, so what are we as a brand, in this doing? What does that culture look like? You know, to the degree where they are wanting to showcase expertise and their members on LinkedIn to kind of go, this is our team, this is who we are. And you know, and when I had this conversation with the leader, I was like, that's exactly the point. You know, when leaders are encouraging to uplift their team members, to create a culture where people are really sticking together and creating a certain type of something, you know, they are being looked after and creating the sense of this is who we are and this is what we can deliver on. People want to feel like they want to belong, and taking that approach is such a significant way of starting this kind of embracing this kind of way. What would stand out for you? Like, what are some of those things that you could share with the audience today?
Well, I think that, and you know, especially if you're trying to tackle this for your organization, the first thing is to really get clear about what are our expectations for leaders. And I'll tell you, I work with more companies than not when I ask that question of the CEO or the CFO or the CHRO, whatever. It's not even one consistent definition. And so I'll hear like culture, which is the starting point, but it has to translate into very behavioral specifics that become the touchstone, because then you can measure off of it, you can develop off of it, right? You can hire for it. And I find that a lot of times it's values or cultures, those are things on the wall, but they're not practically integrated, because the organizations that really drive a brand around their leadership, they've defined what it is in behavioral terms, they measure it. So when it comes to performance reviews, for instance, they're also considering how people get work done, not just what they get done. It's the how and the what. And I think that you have to start there, because it's got to be aligned to the business strategy. And then you can start to invest in programs and training. And I find a lot of companies that just go straight to training. And while I'm a big fan of it, I don't think it's the biggest bang for your buck if you're trying to really reshape a culture and reshape what does it look like to be a successful leader here. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that behavioral specifics, I love that, because like you say, having an idea and having a value system or an idea of a culture is great. But the moment you get to, okay, so tell me how that works, like on a Monday morning, what's the first thing you do on a Monday morning?
Exactly. It takes the grayness out of it, you know, because everyone can have a little different understanding or interpretation of like our cultural values. Those are aspirational and they're very important, but they're just not sufficient to be able to, you know, as I call like photocopy your best leaders. And that's what most, you know, companies want, right? Like we have our exemplars. Oh, we could just make, you know, everyone more like have those characteristics. Well, you can, and you can get it down to very observable, measurable things. And I'm working with a company right now where we started there and now we are developing skills. And now it makes sense, right? Because it's like, all right, we now are clear of what the expectations are for our leaders in behavioral terms. You're going to be measured off of it. And it's only fair for us to equip you with those skills to be able to live up to that. So now instead of it feeling like, you know, oh, now I have more things to do and like, how am I going to do that on top of my day job? You can create a culture that's going to support and develop and grow that kind of capability inside instead of always needing to go hire from the outside.
Yeah. And as you say that, I think one of the things that is a red flag for me the moment I hear a team speak about it, and immediately I'm kind of going, okay, like there's more to this, is when people use the phrase yeah, I'm so busy. Like, I'm so busy, and time becomes this, is never enough time for anything. And you're like, then, like, immediately I'm going back to, okay, so what are the behavioral specifics that you're actually trying to get to here? Because in itself it's attention management, right? And you kind of, if you're not doing that specifically, you're not going to achieve what it is you want to achieve. So little things like that in itself is behavioral specific.
Yeah. And I think most of us follow a career path of like, we become a doer, right? We start our career, we start our jobs, and we're just heads down trying to like learn our job. Then you become a super doer. And now people are coming to you because they're like, I know Kevin can get that done. I trust his quality. I don't have to worry about it. So now all of a sudden, Kevin has a lot more. Now they're like, Kevin's a superstar. We got to promote him to a manager. The problem is that leap from super doer to manager is a treacherous one if you aren't given the skills and support, because just like you said, I hear that over and over, time, because you can't get out of the super doer role in order to now reframe the value you have to the organization, which isn't solving every single problem and being involved in every meeting, because now you need a set of skills like how to delegate, right? How to hold people accountable, how to give feedback, to be able to shed what made you successful as a super doer to now be able to be a leader across generations.
Yeah. And just to tie it, all of that, what you just said, just to tie it back into, that is why the generational dynamics at work is so interesting, because everyone at that generation has experienced it to a degree very differently to the previous generation.
Yes.
And so you kind of go, there has to be a very specific approach to how you unpack this and do it better.
I agree. So, one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, if you could leave the audience today with just like what you want them to take away from today, and then also please tell us about the free self-assessment and more about the book, please.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is test your assumptions. Like stop the ticker tape of communication that your brain is always telling you, and test it at, how do I know that to be true, and can other things be true? So that, I think, already you're going to maybe unlock yourself from some misguided thoughts about other styles and bad interactions. And then I think the skill of listening, like really like stay curious about, I really wonder what it would take to get this person to see a different point of view. Those two in combination automatically is kind of the elixir to help you manage across generations. I'm also a big fan of like, don't try to do everything all at once. I mean, I think everybody is very busy, and I don't want people to think, okay, I got my day job and now I got to, listen on the side. I think the goal is to incorporate it into just the way you operate every single day in every meeting. And for that, I'd encourage everybody to go to a free self-assessment on the facilitationadvantage.com. So the Facilitation Advantage, all one word, .com. And what I like about it for everybody is pick your shot. Pick one or two of the skills that you think are the pain points you have right now. You can measure yourself against other great leaders. And then that gives you a little bit of a roadmap instead of trying to think like, oh, I got to, now change everything about how I lead. You don't have to. Start small. Start with one thing.
Amazing. I love that. So guys, we will put all the links obviously in the description boxes below and wherever you need to find them. She's a dynamic leadership consultant and co-author of the Facilitation Advantage, a practical guide for leaders seeking to enhance their confidence, communication, and influence. Therese Miclot, thank you so much for just unpacking this with us and sharing some insights. It's been a fantastic conversation, and we are going to have you back for more. So I know that there's more we can unpack. So thank you for today, and thank you for spending some time.
It was a pleasure. Thanks again.